Okay, looks like we are recording now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Hill. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at ESF. This is the July 22nd, 2025 Understanding Your Financial Aid and Billing for the upcoming school year at SUNY ESF. We don't have a specific time frame in line, but we do have some information we want to cover to try to help you understand as much as possible the information you're seeing in your financial aid packages and in the billing system that we have. We are joined by a number of colleagues who are in the chat, so feel free to ask questions there if you'd like. But I would like to point out that this is really about general information. So if you do have specific questions about your own financial aid information or your own billing information, it'd be best to reach out to us directly and we could address those specifically with you. So this is really about general information, making sure you're understanding what you're seeing out there in our portal and all the different information that we'll be sharing with you. So all that being said, this is the brief agenda for the evening, just kind of the categories we want to go through. I don't know if it's good or bad news, but I'll be the one talking most of the time tonight, and I'm going to be joined by Michelle McNeil from the Bursar's office, who's going to talk about some of the billing information, and the others are in the chat to help out. So let's start. And I will say that the first part of this is probably going to be fairly quick, just because most of this is information you may already know or may have already gone through a lot of the steps. But I feel like it's important to kind of review this to make sure you know where to get all the information that you may need. So first and foremost, being able to reach the financial aid office, you can see our contact information here. And then also, we have a lot of very important policies and information out on our website and in our college catalog. So I always like to stress that it's important that you be able to access that information. A lot of important details about maintaining eligibility, making sure bills are paid on time, and so forth. So make sure you take a look at these things at some point. They're all available from our main pages. You can follow the links. You can go to those addresses right there. I will warn folks that they are a bit long. There's a lot of information there, but it's important to at least know what's there so you know where to look when you might need that info. Something else you may hear me say a lot tonight, and I apologize for that up front, is that it's very important for students to understand that they need to be carefully monitoring their official campus email address, which is the address which ends in at syr.edu. All of our students will also have an esf.edu address, but as far as official communications, those all go to that SYR address. Also, we do not send notices to the students and to the parents. So typically these information pieces will go to the students. And if it's information about the billing or financial aid and so forth, the student will want to make sure they share that with the parent if needed so that parents are seeing that as well. As far as accessing information, pretty much everything at this stage in the process is going to be through what we call the My ESF portal. And in some cases, you may go through Syracuse University's portal, which I'll talk about a little bit. But you can see the address for the My ESF portal there. And I always like to stress that it's very important that if you do need to send us any kind of documentation or information that may have personal info, we call that PII, personally identifiable information. You never want to use email for that purpose. And the reason being that's not encrypted. And anything you put in there, if systems happen to get hacked or someone's eavesdropping, they would see that info and potentially use that for bad things. So if you need to send information that has any kind of social security number, date of birth, account numbers, anything like that, it's best to use regular postal mail, fax machine if you still have that access, or if you want to upload, there's a way to do that through the portal. Most folks are all set through the application process at this point, but basically at ESF, we use three main application types to determine eligibility for funding. The admissions application, which you've already done, but I like to put this up here just because it's important to remember that the other two applications, the FAFSA for federal aid and state aid applications, if you're a New York State resident, those have to be done each school year. So don't assume that you've done them for this year and you're good for your time at ESF. Each year you have to do those applications again, the FAFSA and the state aid applications. Now, when I say the state aid applications, I mean the TAP application itself. If you are a participant with some of their special scholarship programs, once you're in those, you don't have to apply for those again, but you still have to do the TAP application to renew your eligibility. So as far as sharing aid information, how do we do that? Most of you will have seen this already. So we do our merit scholarship letters in the mail, and then we do financial aid packages in paper format or electronic, or in some cases both. Most folks should have received a paper letter initially, and then everything electronically after that. If you didn't get the paper format, or you haven't seen that, or lost it, don't worry about that. The portal is a better way to view that information anyway. So the financial aid packages that we send out will include all of the aid information that we have available to us, which will include any of our institutional aid that we've offered, as well as estimates or actual amounts for state and federal funding, including the loans and the work study. Okay. Again, we send all of these notices to the SYR address, not to any other address that the student might use. If you have not yet set up your account to be able to access the My ESF portal, there's a process you would need to go through that. I'm not going to go through the details here because I'm going to assume that almost all of you, if not all, have already done this. If you haven't, though, you can start in the applicant portal where you've been doing all your admissions activity, and that's where you'll find these instructions. Fairly straightforward, but you'll go through these steps. You have to provide your login information from that applicant portal, and then they're going to provide you with your ESF PIN, which actually is your ESF account number as well. And then you use that with the instructions they provide to create your ESF ID. All right, again, I'm going really quick through this because I'm fairly certain that everyone has already done this. But if you haven't, go back to that applicant portal and follow the instructions from that yellow box, and that will guide you right through the process. So assuming that's all set up, how do you get into the portal? I'm guessing you've all done this as well. The address, the easiest way I find is just using the address there. It's myesf.esf.edu, but there are links available all over the ESF website that you can get to as a public user. Yeah, as long as you've set up your ESF ID with those previous steps, you'll sign in here with that ESF ID and the password that you created. Good to know that link is there. If you ever have login problems, our help desk is very helpful with trying to resolve any access issues you might have. And then assuming you can successfully log into the portal. As far as we're concerned for tonight, there's two main links that you want to be aware of in this menu. This is typically going to be on the left-hand side of the screen. And as I'm a financial aid guy, I put our financial aid link in a big red circle there, so I know you can get to it. But for tonight, the two you want to be aware of, one, the financial aid information to view the aid package. And then just two below that, you see the link that says student account. And that's the one you want to use to look at your billing information. Very important to note that those are distinct, separate locations, separate information. So you want to know to make sure you're looking at the correct item depending on what you're looking to do in the portal. So let's start with the financial aid information. As you go to that financial aid link, there's going to be a number of different tabs you can go to. In all honesty, the first two, starting with the home tab that you see there, are the ones that are going to be important to you. The others are really not used for the most part. You can look at them if you'd like, but typically you're going to start on the home tab and use the offer tab to view everything else. Home tab is really important because this always is where you're going to start when you go to the page. And this is going to list all of the outstanding or completed items that you have related to your financial aid. Now, this is kind of like a living document, meaning that as the student takes action with their financial aid, this could change. So every student, as they get aid packages created, will have terms and conditions they have to agree to. As soon as a FAFSA comes in, you'll see it's going to show as it's received and satisfied. Typically, if you're seeing green, that means good. If you're seeing yellow or red, that might indicate that you have something you have to complete. Also note the little arrow to the right. If you click that, that'll give you more information about the requirement that's listed there. Also, a lot of times people miss the fact that if you actually click on the name of the item, so if you're looking here and you see terms and conditions, if you click on that, in many cases, that will be an active link that will take you to a location where you can resolve or satisfy that item. So I'd like to really briefly touch upon this one because it leads to some confusion sometimes. These are two requirements that will appear on the home tab for most students. And this is simply a couple of questions that we have to ask, which basically are whether or not you would like to authorize ESF to use federal aid funds to automatically pay for certain expenses which aren't allowed through the regulations as they are. So we really don't have a lot of, or any of these types of expenses, but this would be, for example, if a student has a parking ticket that got put onto their bill, or they have a library overdue fine or something similar on their ESF bill. If the student has authorized it, we can use aid funds from the federal government to pay for those. Most students prefer that, but again, we don't put those types of charges on our bill anyway, so this really doesn't impact anything. But the student has the option to say, yes, I authorize the school to do that, or I do not authorize them to do that. One is about just being able to use aid to pay for those types of charges. The other is about being able to use a limited amount of aid from the current year to cover those sorts of charges from a prior year. So an example might be a student that had a parking ticket they didn't know about and they realized it was there in the next year. We could potentially use some aid from that year to pay for that. Right. Again, we don't have any of those, so not a big deal, but we get a lot of questions because people read these descriptions and they sometimes can be confusing. You'll also note there the red box. If you need to upload documents to us, that's the way you can start to do that. So that'll take you out to the main document upload center and you can choose where you're sending the information. If you want to send things to us, just select financial aid as your option, and that'll send those documents to us more securely than using email. Okay, moving on. Now we're on what I think is the most important part of the financial aid process. This is the offer tab. Probably the most common place you're going to be. You're going to spend the most time here. This is where you're going to get to see all of the aid information, including estimated costs and the actual aid offers. You'll also see that view your SUNY financial aid plan in the blue box there. That's a link that will actually let you download as a PDF and then print if you want the paper type version that we actually mail out. So that's the kind of one page version of the aid package, which can be a great way to see it all summarized. First thing we're going to provide on this tab is what's called the cost of attendance. And you can see my text there at the top. I like to stress this part that this is not your bill. One of the biggest things we see is people calling us or emailing us and telling us they're looking at their bill when they're actually looking at the cost of attendance. And there's a very big difference between the cost of attendance and what's in the bill. So the cost of attendance is basically a list of estimated expenses that we have used in the calculation of what kind of financial aid we can offer to the student. Typically, we'll have this broken up into billable and non-billable items or direct and indirect expenses. This is basically telling what types of expenses may show up on a bill or may not, and that will vary depending on what types of options the students has selected. So for example, in this case, we're looking at billable items for a student who would have tuition and fees from the college. This is a student who is actually planning to live off campus. So on their non-billable items, you can see they have off-campus housing estimates, food estimates, and so forth. For a student that is living on campus, the housing and the food would be part of the billable items. Again, not necessarily saying that these amounts will specifically be on your bill, but these are the expenses that you were likely to see on a bill. I also like to note, because someone questioned me on this once, the amounts you see here are just for example purposes. Those are from a different year. So don't look at those and assume that I'm telling you this is what your estimated expenses are. You want to look at your aid package to see what those are. Next part, this is probably the most important part of it. This is where we're going to list out all of your free money, as we like to call it. So grants and scholarships that we think you're eligible to receive. This could include federal Pell Grants if you're eligible, institutional aid, state aid, and so forth. For most of these, you're going to see the green accepted status for these automatically. We assume that a student wants to accept the free money, so they'll go in that way automatically. One of the questions we get quite a lot, though, is what am I doing with my SUNY tuition credit and my tuition assistance program? For students from New York State who potentially are eligible for these programs, those are going to show up as offered to you, meaning that you potentially have to take action to be able to get those. But with those two in particular, those are estimated because we don't know a student's actual eligibility until their state aid application has been completed and processed. So if you go in and you see these as estimated or offered, you won't be able to take action, but that would be an indicator that you need to make sure your application with the state is complete and doesn't have any errors with it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then last, what we're going to do is what we call the self-help type of financial aid. And for all of these are awards that we do ask the students to provide a response to us, telling us if they want these. So if you have not yet done this, this is the kind of thing that can start to move these types of aid forward. So work study will have an accept or decline box, and you'd have to just use the drop down to select what you want. Loans will be similar. They will have three options. You can accept the loan, and that would tell us that you want to accept the loan amount that's offered there. You can decline, which just means you don't want it, or you can select modify. And if you select modify, then you can put an amount that's lower than what we've offered in there if that's what you would prefer to do. Just note with the modify option, if you choose a lower amount, whatever amount you accept is still going to be split equally between the fall and the spring semesters. So don't assume that if you put an amount in there, it's all going to go towards the fall. If you want to do something like that, you'd have to reach out to us so we could directly set that up for you. So here's one other view. This is that SUNY financial aid plan that I mentioned. This is the version that we mail out. It's really all of that same information, but kind of summarized in a smaller format. The only thing I like to kind of highlight here is that red box, which is what we call the net cost. And this is probably as close as we're going to get to the magic question of what's this going to cost me out of pocket. All we're doing here, however, is taking your estimated cost of attendance from the top there. We're subtracting the total of your grants and scholarships, and what we have left then is net cost. This is where it's important to remember that this is not a bill, right? So that's kind of a budgeting tool that can help you figure out what your costs may be, but this is not saying this is what you have to pay. That's really what the billing process is going to be for. So these are numbers similar to what you may have all seen in your financial aid packages. I won't spend too much time on here because you can view this in your own aid package. One thing I will note, if you look at the amounts for housing and food, we automatically had most students packaged for living in a triple hall in Centennial Hall for this year. And if the student selected a different room type, then the housing amount that's included in there would have been different. We would have adjusted that for you. Okay, so we talked about the financial aid part through there. So hopefully you have a good way now to be able to get in and make a little bit of sense about the financial aid information you're seeing. I want to kind of talk a little bit about how aid relates to the billing, and then I'll pass it over to the bursar to talk about their actual billing notes that they want to share. But again, I've mentioned that the financial aid package is not a bill. It's just giving you estimated info. So I like to think of the aid part as here's a budget that you can use that may help you plan for your expenses. But one of the things that can be tricky is that we don't always know the exact amounts that a student may have to pay. Best example of that is if a student wants to pick a meal plan from, has to pick a meal plan from Syracuse University, it's very common that they may select a plan that is of a different cost than what we've estimated. We use an estimate of the unlimited Syracuse University meal plan amount. A lot of our students pick a plan that is less expensive. So this is why you want to be able to adjust your budgeting plan a little bit based on the selections you may make. Right, so it's important to know that your choices impact what your needs are for borrowing and so forth. If you haven't heard of the term bursar, that's something you'll want to keep in the back of your mind. At both ESF and Syracuse University, the official name of our billing offices or student account offices are called the bursar's office. All right, so if you have questions about billing and you see links for bursar, that's the office that we're talking about there. You get financial aid at the start of the year, which shows you the annual amount, but we show you a fall amount and a spring amount within the aid package. Billing is done specifically by semester, though. So what you'll see is as a new student or a continuing student, your first bill each semester is likely to be the bill that comes out from ESF. For an on-campus student, that's going to have tuition, itemized fees, and your housing charges included. And then at a later date, probably in mid-September, I believe it is, students who have a meal plan from Syracuse University will get a bill separately from them that will be for whatever the specific amount is of the plan that they selected. So it's really important to remember that there are two separate bills you're likely to see if living on campus and you have a meal plan. Right? A student that moves off campus or doesn't have a meal plan would just have the ESF bill. So as this process goes forward, you probably have all received your notices about your billing already from ESF, and hopefully you've been able to go in and look at that. With financial aid, we can't start to disperse any aid until classes have started. Now, disbursement basically means we take the money from the various sources and we're actually going to then apply it to the student's bill. So we're not allowed to do that at the earliest for some types of aid until classes start. State aid in many cases can't even be processed until later in the semester, or certain types even after the semester has ended. So until that point, if we are confident that a student is going to receive a certain amount of aid from a source that isn't paid yet, that goes in as pending financial aid. So as you start to look at your billing information and you look at the tabs that show your charges, you're going to see a total account balance. And then you'll see a box which lists the total amount of your pending financial aid, or a term I've heard that I like is anticipated financial aid. So as you're trying to determine what you need to pay for the bill for ESF for the semester, the guidance that you might see in the notice from the bursar's office will say, take your total account balance and subtract the total of pending aid from that. The idea being you pay the remaining after the pending aid, and then when the pending aid finally does get applied to the account, it will cover the rest of that balance for you. So the idea here is to make sure that there's enough to cover your bill, of course. What we're going to do is as your aid funds come through, those will be used by the bursar's office first to cover any of the outstanding charges on the ESF bill. So a Pell Grant, an institutional scholarship, a student loan, that all comes in, pays your ESF bill first as much as it can. Right? If there's anything remaining after all that aid is applied, that's the amount you would have to pay to cover the balance on the bill. And then you just want to make sure you're planning for when the SU bill comes later on to make sure you're prepared to pay that as well. If you have more financial aid than what the bill is for, or there's ever been an overpayment or some charge went away after you had already paid for it, and you have what's called a credit balance or an excess of funds in your student account, that would then be refunded back to the student, or in some cases, a parent if they have a parent's loan. And that would be the money that you could then use to help pay the Syracuse University bill, buy books, or whatever else you had intended for that. So, in essence, what's happening here is the aid that's offered could potentially give you enough to cover all of those expenses, but you have to make sure you're using it appropriately to make sure those are all paid. So, when it comes to getting that money back, that's what's called a refund. And for anything given to the student, the refunds are done through a company called Bank Mobile, which the Bursar's office will talk about a little bit. But just to stress, Bank Mobile is not a scam. So if you see an information from them, that is okay to use them. That's how the money will get to you if you're ever due a refund.
All righty, my name is Michelle McNeil. I'm the bursar, and I think Mark did a great job telling you everything you need to know about your bill. So I'm done. No, I'm only kidding. Um, Bills were posted in the student portals on July 15th, just last week. They are due August 15th. And to access them, you go right to where Mark said to two menu items below your financial aid where it says student account. You click on it, you only have one option, view your bill, and your bill shows up. So you'll be able to see the details from that screen. You'll also have an option to pay your bill using a credit card or your bank account, and you'll also be able to sign up for a payment plan. There is a small fee for the payment plan. It's $35 per semester. Um, there's no interest, but it does cost a small initial fee to sign up for the plan. If you sign up for it by August 15th, you take your balance due and divide it over 4 equal installments. If you don't sign up until after the first due date, then you're down to 3 installments. And every 15th of the month is considered a due date. So the longer you wait, the less number of payments you have to cover your bill. So sign up as early as possible to make a lower payment. Like Mark said, if you purchase a meal plan, Syracuse University will email the bills or invoice the bills the invoices on September 22nd. and they are due October 17th at the SU Bursar's office through MySlice. Do not pay those through ESF because we cannot transfer the money. Also, be careful when paying your ESF bill that you pay it on the ESF portal and not MySlice, because SU will not transfer the money over to us. It'll just sit there and you have to go request a refund from them. And sometimes it takes a little while. So just be careful where you're making your payments. Bank Mobile is a legitimate company. We get this question an awful lot. We do highly recommend setting up a preference with Bank Mobile. If at any time you are eligible for your student is eligible for a refund, if there is a preference set up, then once we send Bank Mobile the information, money gets put into that account within 24 to 48 hours. And it doesn't matter whose account it is. It could be a parent's account, the student's account. As long as there's a bank account information set up, the money gets electronically transferred over. If you do not set up a preference, Bank Mobile will hold that money for 21 days and then send a paper check to the home address. So if you need that money to pay other bills and you don't have a preference, it's going to be delayed. You're going to get delayed receiving that money. Next screen. Thank you. One more thing is, if you may pay your bill immediately, but after the first week, there's a change in a schedule. The student needs to keep on top of the bill anytime there's a change in the schedule, because you never know when there might be an additional fee charged for a class. Most likely it will be a course fee, and those course fees vary depending on the course and what the fee is to cover. So I would make sure you keep an eye on your bill once a week, once every couple of weeks, just until you know the schedule has been settled and you do not owe any more money. Our contact information is listed on the screen. We are right down the hall from financial aid. We talk to financial aid, unfortunately to Mark. We talk to them quite a bit, actually. We work very well together. Email us, call us. If you're in the area, stop in. We're here to help. We're here to help make things easier for you. We have a very robust website. I think it's got a lot more information on it than it used to. So feel free to check out our website. It's got a plethora of information. And if you can't find it there, then please reach out to us and we'll help you. And that's all I've got for now.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Okay. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit about some other types of aid just to help people stay aware of how some of these other types of aid that don't necessarily interact with the bill or interact in a different way, how they operate. So I like to touch upon work study a little bit. We get a lot of questions about this, especially at this time of year. So if a student has work study as part of their financial aid package, biggest thing to know here is that this is really about providing additional job opportunities for students. Right? So this is basically us getting some federal money to create these jobs. Biggest thing to remember here is that these funds are never going to be applied to a billing statement or account for you. All right, so you'll see an amount in your aid package, but we're not going to put that as a credit towards your billing charges. Instead, the way this program operates is the work study amount that you see in the financial aid package is basically a pool of money that we use to pay the wages for a student who gets a job through the work study program and actually works. Right. So it's going to work like a job, just like any other employment opportunity. So the reason is that this is there is maybe it gives you employment opportunities on campus instead of off. Maybe you can find something connected to your academic interests or that fit your other interests and so forth. So it's a job like any other. If a student wants to use work study, great. They can take advantage of whatever opportunities are available. If they choose not to do work study, it's not going to change the billing status at all because that money's never flowing through the billing at all. All right. Um, just keep in mind that we don't guarantee employment. So even if a student has a work study grant, it doesn't mean we're going to place them in a job in any way. The students who have work study will be able to seek out employment through the listing of jobs that are available. We will post that on our website and on our bulletin board outside our office just before the semester starts. And then any students that have work study can reach out to the supervisors to try to get those jobs. If hired, then it's just a matter of doing some paperwork. And then as soon as the student starts working, they're going to do timesheets like in any other job. One little side note that can sometimes surprise folks is ESF work study employees are state employees. And in the state payroll system, there is what's called a pay lag that exists, which means that after a student or a state employee starts working, they won't get their first paycheck until two pay periods or 4 weeks after they have started. So as a work study student, make sure you're planning on that to know that you're not going to have that first paycheck for a little bit until after you've started. Silver lining there on the flip side of that, after you've stopped working, you're still going to have two paychecks that'll continue on until until they're finished. And I like to touch upon state aid sources for any of our New York State residents on. So I mentioned before how the TAP and the SUNY tuition credit will be estimated or offered, and they'll have a lock status. So what happens is if those are in that offered status when you look in the aid package and you try to accept them, you're going to get a message that says these are locked and you need to contact your financial aid office for assistance. What that basically just means is that we have not yet received anything from the state telling us that the student is actually eligible for funding through the two state programs, TAP and the SUNY tuition credit. So the solution there would be make sure the TAP application is completed, make sure that the TAP application is linked to ESF, and make sure you don't have any errors. Okay. One little side note, if people are on that haven't updated their TAP application to include ESF, it can be really difficult to find us as a school to link to. And we've asked them to change this and they have not been able to do so yet. So if you need to link ESF to your TAP application through the state, you want to search with SUC and then a space and then EN. So and it's in the chat. I see that there. So if you need to search for TAP for ESF on the TAP application, that's the way to search for it. Right. There are also a couple special scholarships the state offers, Excelsior and STEM grant being the two big ones. Those are the programs that require a separate application. So your flow would have been FAFSA, then the TAP application, and then either Excelsior or the STEM grant application. Right. Once you've done those and you're in the programs, you don't have to apply for them again, but you do have to do the TAP application each year for those to continue. Right. With both of those, Excelsior and the STEM, please be very well aware of all the rules that come with them. Unfortunately, we have a way of making these things very complicated. In particular, with Excelsior, there are rules about how many credits a student has to complete on average per year that are what I'll call applicable to the student's degree program. Right, so basically that means that a course that is needed for the degree that's listed in the student's program list and degree audit, it'll say all the different courses, general education and electives and so forth. In order to be considered eligible for financial aid, those credits have to be something that's needed to earn the student's degree. So minors, the courses taken for minors wouldn't count. Just courses that students want to take for fun or for more learning would not apply unless they're actually part of the program that requires it. Right. So really important that students know they have to enroll in a correct number of credits each semester, typically 12 that are degree applicable. And for Excelsior, it's 30 credit hours per year have to be earned on average that are applicable to the degree. Really important to keep on pace with that. And then lastly, with these awards, they can be affected by other aid a student receives. STEM grant is really only affected by other tuition specific awards like TAP and the SUNY tuition credit. But Excelsior is reduced by anything else that's received as a grant or scholarship, unless that is specifically and only for a non-tuition expense. Right. So as far as ESF institutional aid, the only scholarship we offer that would not impact Excelsior is the 1911 scholarship. Anything else that we offer, because those can be used for anything in the cost of attendance, those would reduce the amount of Excelsior scholarship a student could receive. All right, so Excelsior starts at the tuition amount of 7,070, and then Pell, TAP, SUNY tuition credit, ESF scholarships, outside scholarships, most of the time will be deducted from that, and whatever's left over is what Excelsior would actually offer. So these are some of these policies that you'll see on that webpage if you're, having trouble going to sleep some night, read through these. But if you're in these programs, those in particular are really important that you keep on top of the rules so that you don't get shocks later on if something doesn't work out for you with those. So some final notes as I wrap it up here. Just some things I like to think about as you're going through all this that may help make some sense, all of this. Really big first step I've always thought is create your own budget of what you think your expenses are going to be. So we've done that with the cost of attendance, but like I was saying, things like housing and meals may vary depending on the choices a student may make. So maybe you could start with our cost of attendance, but feel free to adjust that based on those choices. So if you're going to choose a different meal plan, adjust the amount that's in that budget for that expense. And that would then in turn maybe influence how much you decide you need to borrow, if anything, what you might need for a payment plan and so forth, right? Once you have a budget you feel comfortable with, make sure you compare that to the total amount of resource that you have coming in. So add up all the free money that's listed, look at what loans you might be taking, make sure you have enough in all those resources to equal up to that budget. And that's going to put you in a pretty good spot to cover all your expenses for the school year. And then just remember that these are all estimates. So when it comes to the actual billing amounts, those aren't necessarily going to line up exactly with the budget because those are estimates. Okay. Make sure you do some comparisons. I think we're kind of past that point now, but as you look at your aid package as well, make sure you know what is what within the aid package. So if you're not sure if something is a free source of money or a self-help like work study or loans, feel free to reach out to us and ask us. Make sure that makes sense. Make sure you know what your work study amount is if you have that, because that's the maximum the student can earn while they're working for that school year, right? So if they get to that maximum and they're still working, we're going to have them stop because they've earned their max there. Right? Really important to make sure you know scholarship and grant criteria and other rules. So on our webpage, we have a whole page that's called Satisfactory Academic Progress. And that's when you do want to look over. There's different sections, one for institutional aid, one for state, one for federal, and those will have all the rules and terms and conditions that will also in many cases be in the terms and conditions that students agree to when they start up. Right. But that'll have things like what GPA is required, when you have to do a FAFSA, when you don't, timing for all of that, and so forth. And then there's still time always to look for outside sources of funding if you haven't done that. That can often be a good way to help pay for your expenses. Just again, to kind of loop back, remember that outside sources can also affect Excelsior if you're a recipient in that program. So, last minute reminders, I've said this one before, but please make sure you're checking email regularly. And also a good idea to make sure you go into the portal once in a while and check your bill and your aid package. Things can change throughout the year. So don't look just once and pay and assume it's all going to be locked in stone at that point, because it can change along the way. Right. If you do have a meal plan with Syracuse University, and most first year students have to have one, please don't forget about that bill. It comes later on, and it's really important to remember that we cannot send any money to SU on behalf of a student. So whether you have excess aid or you've paid us thinking it'll go to SU, that's never going to move over to them. The only thing we could do is give excess money to you, student or parent, and then you would have to pay them. So when that bill comes out, don't be shocked by it because it's not going to have any aid credits listed against it. Hopefully you've planned out enough to have excess or have money available when that time comes to pay for that. Right? And I talked about the ESF code on the TAP application and in the Excelsior rules there, so I think I won't go over those again. But I think that puts us in a good spot. So I'm going to open up for any last minute questions. I think we've been doing good in the chat so far. I am going to stop the share and